Many in the Black community, if I'm being honest with you, because I want to be, believe that you are being used as a pawn by the right and that you're a charlatan of sorts.
He's not a Republican.
I don't think there's any evidence I've been co-opted by anyone, and I think that that's an ad hominem tactic people use to not address really the important conversations we're having here.
At a time when the culture in America has essentially rejected colorblindness, instead embracing an almost obsessive focus on race and how we differ from one another, I honestly wasn't shocked that he was met with that kind of vitriol. We'll get back to that portion of the exchange in just a minute.
Today, we dive into a heated debate that has sparked discussions across the political spectrum. Ana Kasparian of the Young Turks weighs in on what she calls the race war on wokeness, criticizing Sunny Hostin's handling of her exchange with author and analyst Coleman Hughes on The View. Hughes, known for advocating class-based solutions to inequality, challenges identity-driven narratives that dominate modern discourse. Hostin, on the other hand, argues that race remains central to understanding systemic disparities. Kasparian strongly criticized Hostin's approach, calling out her condescending tone and failure to engage with Hughes's arguments. Instead of addressing his points, Hostin resorted to personal attacks, portraying him as a pawn of the alt-right and questioning his motives. Kasparian argued that this dismissive attitude stifles meaningful debate and reflects an unwillingness to confront challenging ideas.
And analyst Coleman Hughes was recently met with some intense hostility, specifically from Sunny Hostin on The View, as he appeared on the show to promote his new book, The End of Race Politics: Arguments for a Colorblind America. At a time when the culture in America has essentially rejected colorblindness, instead embracing an almost obsessive focus on race and how we differ from one another, I honestly wasn't shocked that he was met with that kind of vitriol. We'll get back to that portion of the exchange in just a minute. But first, I do think it's actually important to understand Coleman as a person and the argument he's trying to make. In the interest of full disclosure, though, I do have to admit that I'm a fan of Coleman's, even though he and I have some disagreements. He's more supportive of Israel's war on Gaza, as an example. On some issues, he definitely leans to the right of me. But I actually find him to be thoughtful. He makes thought-provoking arguments in good faith. And I don't know about you, but I've been increasingly bored with shows that have default ideological talking points that hosts never deviate from. It's a mindless snooze fest. Sometimes Coleman's analysis on certain current events challenge my own, and I find that to be a good thing. We should all be willing to challenge and reevaluate our own beliefs without assuming the one challenging us is some grifter or right-wing pawn. I think it makes us smarter and mentally stronger. Now, with that out of the way, let's hear Coleman out on the direction he believes policy should go in America.
The default right now in a lot of areas of policy is to use, Black and Hispanic identity as a proxy for disadvantage. And my argument is that you actually get a better picture of who needs help by looking at socioeconomics and income. That picks out people in a more accurate way.
Not my question, but when you say that socioeconomics picks out people in a better way than race, when you do look at the socioeconomics, you see the huge disparity between white households and Black households. You see the huge disparity between white households and Hispanic households. So your argument, and I've read your book twice because I wanted to give it a chance, your argument that race has no place in that equation is really fundamentally flawed.
In contrast, Hughes presents an alternative approach to addressing inequality. In his book, The End of Race Politics: Arguments for a Colorblind America, he advocates for class-based policies that tackle poverty without prioritizing race. He believes that focusing on socioeconomic factors is not only more effective, but also prevents the exclusion of disadvantaged individuals from non-minority groups. However, Hostin remains firm in her stance, citing persistent income and wealth disparities among Black, Hispanic, and white households. She criticizes Hughes's approach as simplistic and flawed, arguing that his ideas have been co-opted by conservatives to downplay systemic racism. Hughes draws inspiration from Martin Luther King Jr., referencing King's support for class-based solutions like a Bill of Rights for the disadvantaged and universal basic income. He argues that such policies are intentionally inclusive, addressing racial inequalities through economic empowerment rather than race-based frameworks.
Lack of logic here is what's fundamentally flawed. Just keeping it real. It's somewhat strange how triggered she is by the notion that we should focus economic policies on class rather than identity like race. I assure you there are plenty of poor people of all races in America. However, she herself is a wealthy woman of color, so maybe class-based issues don't appeal to her the same way as they would for the working poor in America. And while it is true that Black and Latino Americans are more economically disadvantaged on average, it's also true that class-based policies would disproportionately benefit their lives without leaving poor white Americans behind. Why is that a bad thing? Don't we want to see all of our fellow Americans succeed, regardless of religion, race, gender, sexual orientation, etc.? Class-based economic policies have more buy-in among voters and tend to be harder to repeal because they're applied to everyone impacted by poverty. Coleman managed to maintain his composure, something that he's insanely skilled in, and responded, in my opinion, perfectly.
There's two separate questions. One is whether each racial group is socioeconomically the same. That I agree with you, they're not.
Yeah, they're not, and the stats show that.
Yeah, of course, I agree with that fully. The question is, how do you address that in the way that actually targets poverty the best?
Great.
And what Martin Luther King wrote in his book, Why We Can't Wait, is he called it, we need a Bill of Rights for the disadvantaged. And he said, yes, we should address racial inequality. Yes, we should address the legacy of slavery. But the way to do that is on the basis of class. And that will disproportionately target Blacks and Hispanics because they're disproportionately poor, but it will be doing so in a way that also helps the white poor, in a way that addresses poverty as the thing to be addressed.
He's right. I mean, I think he makes really good points there. But look, maybe Sunny Hostin has a counterpoint that we haven't even considered. So let's keep an open mind and give her a chance to respond.
You claim that color blindness was the goal of the civil rights movement, based upon Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, content of character versus the color of skin. He also said in 1968, it was about less than a week before he was assassinated, this country never stops to realize that they owe a people kept in slavery for 244 years. So rather than class, he did write about that earlier on, right before his death. He made the argument for racial equality and racial reparations. And so your argument for color blindness, I think, is something that the right has co-opted.
The quote that you just pointed out about doing something special for the Negro, that's from the book Why We Can't Wait that I just mentioned.
Yes.
A couple paragraphs later, he lays out exactly what that something special was.
Yes.
And it was the Bill of Rights for the Disadvantaged, a broad class-based policy.
But he also says you must include race.
Kasparian expands on Hughes's argument, warning against the over-reliance on identity politics. She argues that figures like Hostin risk alienating potential allies in the fight against poverty by focusing too narrowly on race. Kasparian defends class-based policies as more effective in addressing economic inequality, while also fostering broader political unity. She asserts that policies based on socioeconomic needs are harder to dismantle and gain stronger public support due to their fairness and inclusivity. Kasparian doesn't hold back in her critique, labeling figures like Hostin as part of a divisive and elitist narrative. She highlights Hostin's privileged background, symbolized by her designer attire during the debate, as a stark contrast to the struggles of working-class communities. According to Kasparian, this disconnect undermines the credibility of race-focused social justice efforts. Ultimately, Kasparian presents Hughes's approach as a refreshing departure from rigid ideological divides. By emphasizing class over race, Hughes offers a unifying framework that transcends political lines and focuses on the shared struggles of the economically disadvantaged. In a move that reflects her commitment to open dialogue, Kasparian invites Hughes to join her show, demonstrating a willingness to engage with differing viewpoints. This kind of discourse, she argues, is essential for real progress, not performative outrage or partisanship.